CJ Nitkowski joins the show. Going to get his thoughts on everything that's happened so far this offseason for the Atlanta Braves, and particularly the move to add Jeremy Hefner as pitching coach.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. Also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I am your host, Jake Mastroianni. I've been covering the Atlanta Braves in both written and podcast form for over 10 years now, and this is Locked On Braves, your daily connection to all things Atlanta Braves. And on today's episode, CJ Nitkowski is rejoining the podcast to give his thoughts on what's happened so far this offseason for the Atlanta Braves. And I really want to get his opinion on the coaching moves, particularly the addition of Jeremy Hefner as pitching coach. So looking forward to hearing what CJ has to say. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Without further ado, here is my conversation with CJ. And joining me on today's show is a Atlanta Braves TV color analyst, CJ Nitkowski. So glad to have you back on the podcast, CJ. Thanks so much for taking some time to talk with me today.
Yeah, Jake, good to be with you again, man. Getting a little bit closer. Spring training around the corner, so good time to catch up.
Yeah, so at what point, I wanted to ask you, because obviously as a player and now as an analyst, you're still very much involved in the game and covering it. When did you really start to get that itch? I know as a fan, like November, December, like especially because I'm pretty much all in on baseball. I don't really follow other sports too closely, but I get pretty eager. But especially once that calendar rolls over, it's like I cannot wait any longer. I need it here.
I'm with you, and I'm kind of a one sport guy as well. Like I'll catch some games here and there, watch some of the stuff, but not really. I don't follow it all that closely. So I'm a one trick pony. So I have those same kind of anxieties. It's funny, man. Like you look forward to the end of the season, you're always hoping it's going to end covering and talking about a World Series. But once we get into the offseason, man, I get anxious. I'm trying to be better about enjoying the downtime and like taking advantage of it, right? You and I were just talking beforehand just about, having families and kids and how quick things go. And I'm one semester away now from being an empty nester. And I should probably enjoy the time that I get in the offseason more than I do, because I am so excited and looking forward to baseball, whether it was as a player or even now as a broadcaster. Like I was having this conversation the other day with somebody, like, man, I'm ready to go. At the same time, man, like enjoy the time. Like my daughter's home from college right now, which is nice. I have my last son who still lives at home. Like just enjoy it. It's really hard to, because we love the sport. We love covering it. We love watching it. I can't wait to get to spring training, and love that we have a little bit more spring training coverage like we did last year than we've had in previous years. But I'm trying to be as patient as possible, which is a big time weakness of mine.
Yeah, it is tough. And I'm right there with you. Like I said, and we were talking before, I got 3 little kids. So it does give me a little bit more time to interact with them and my wife as well, because, during the season, and I know, or you live this even better than me. I mean, we're going to bed 10, 11 o'clock at night, at the earliest. And here I am at some nights, I'm in bed sometimes before 9 o'clock. And she's like, what are you doing here? And so, it is a little bit strange during the off season, but
it's hard to wind down. I don't know how you are, but after games, and it's just like playing. Like as a player, for a night game, I'd be lucky if I was sleeping by 1 o'clock, just because you're so wound up, especially when you're in the bullpen and you have to be live every night. And so you're taking whatever energy drink that you're taking or whatever you do to get ready. It is really difficult to calm down and to come off of it. When I get home, I have about a 45-minute drive from the ballpark when we're at home. A lot of times I need time to unwind, and I'm flipping on West Coast games and watching those in the background, and hope that I get a little bit tired at that point, and maybe it's midnight. But they're late nights during the season, man. It's hard to turn it off.
It certainly is. Yeah. And especially if it's a tight game, it comes down to it, or there's that one decision. I'm not even a manager, but there's like that one decision in the game. And I'm thinking, what could I have done this, so yeah, it's definitely, fans kind of live that too as well. But, like we have turned the calendar. It is 2026. We're a little bit closer to spring training. And are the Braves ready, CJ? I mean, they've made a lot of moves so far this offseason. Certainly plenty of time left. Still a lot of big-time free agents that are out there. But if there are no more moves, how do you feel about the Atlanta Braves offseason so far?
Yeah, it's been a great one, right? We sit there kind of, again, anxiously waiting for the moves to happen. And once they started rolling, it was one good move after another. We listened to what Alex Anthopoulos said at the end of the season and what the priorities were. And for the most part, those have been addressed. I was surprised at the time when he first, at the very beginning of the offseason, mentioned starting pitching. Because I was looking at our group and saying, man, if everyone's healthy, and I know it's always a big if, they're probably in a pretty good spot. And then he started to back off of that a little bit as the offseason went on. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that Spencer Schwellenbach was feeling good. Grant Holmes just talking about feeling the best that he has ever felt. Now, they know, of course, what can happen when guys get hurt. We had to live it in the worst way last year. And so they still may make that move, but it didn't seem like it was as big of a priority as the other needs, which they had to get done. And so to get shortstop done, to get the bench done the way that they did, with Yastrzemski and Dubón, like those were really good moves. To get Iggy back, to add Suarez, like the bullpen has gotten deeper. I'm thrilled with how the offseason has gone. But I think like every other fan, we're greedy. And so we always want more, right? I mean, when I did my little wish list right at the beginning of the offseason, I put Ranger Suárez as my top starting pitcher that I thought maybe would be realistic, that you'd have a shot at. And I still feel that way. As good as this rotation is, I'd be thrilled if they can add him. There is something about maybe having that guy, first of all, just out of the division will be a win and not pitching against the Braves, but also having him pitch for you. I know he doesn't throw a lot of innings during the season. He hasn't done it in his career. But I like him, man. I like the way he pitches. I like the way he carries himself. It's already a good enough rotation. But if I'm going to be greedy, that's the one last kind of little thing I'd love to have.
I think that's a good point. And feel free to disagree with us. And look, I get the comments all the time. You don't go hard enough on this front office. They need to do more. Like there's all, as you said, we're fans, we can be greedy and we want to go over the top, but let me know if you disagree. And it's fine if you do. I feel like the moves made this offseason I think they are great. And I've said as much, but I feel like these moves are more to raise the floor of this team more so than raise the ceiling of this team. I think this is maybe the deepest team they've had in a long time. You mentioned the bench. You talk about, bringing on a Yastrzemski with, either a Sean Murphy or Drake Baldwin's going to be on the bench or in the DH spot. You got Mauricio, Dubón. I feel like this team is as deep as it's been in a while, but I feel like the moves made have more so just put this team back into, contention. I mean, it was a 76-win team. Let's be honest. I know a lot of injuries in that, but I think this is more just raise the floor of this team and what they can be, which is still a really good team. I don't know that it's raised the ceiling. And I think to kind of what you were alluding to, if you went and got Ranger Suárez, okay, now we're talking, we're World Series favorites again. If you were to go add a big bat, okay, now you're World Series favorites again. And the Braves are in that discussion. I'm not trying to say that they're not, but would you agree with the assessment that the moves this offseason, you shored up shortstop, you shored up some of the depth at the position player on the bench there, but these are more just floor raising moves and not ceiling raising moves?
Yeah, I think it's a fair assessment. I think it also had to do with the fact that where the roster was, right? When we talked about it toward the end of the season, a handful of times, Brandon and I on the broadcast about what we anticipated the winter was going to look like. And if you looked at the roster, there were not a lot of places to really afford you major upgrades. There weren't spaces for it. There really weren't in the outfield. We saw a supplemental piece, and it's a good one in Mike Yastrzemski, but there wasn't going to be, Kyle Tucker or Cody Bellinger wasn't going to fit on this roster. It just wouldn't have made sense to jump into the deep end. As much as they make a team better, there would have had to have been some kind of shuffling or subtraction of something significant in order to make that work. Because I do think the Braves, as much as Marcel, when he was right, was great to have as a DH, I think they like the idea of the flexibility in the DH spot. I think that's needed with Drake Baldwin. I think it's needed with Ronald, although it looks like he's running great in Venezuela right now. We saw what was going on with him last year and maybe not feeling right every day. And there was times where you probably wanted to give him some DH at bats. And I think you want to have that flexibility to do that a little bit more with all the guys, right? If you listen to Walt's press conference at the very beginning when he got the job and when he came on our radio show on MLB Network Radio, he talked a lot about rest. Like it was a clear point on his part to figure out ways to get guys those moments where they could rest. And sometimes that means just DHing and taking your 4 at bats. So a point there is I don't think there was a position player spot outside of shortstop where there was going to be a major upgrade. And unfortunately, shortstop had a pretty weak market. I'm thrilled that we got Kim back at the price that we got him. I know it was a little expensive, but to get him in on a 1 year and the fact I believe you can still offer him a qualifying offer at the end as well, I think is the best you were going to do right? I was kind of pipe dreaming a little bit on Corey Seager and Jeremy Pena, and those were long shots at best, but it was worth at least kind of bringing up and discussing because the shortstop market was so light. So I think we did the best that we probably could. Now, the area in which you can talk about, I think, upgrades that still would be there as far as kind of landing that big one would be a starting pitcher. Dylan Cease got a big contract, man. I don't know if I would have been comfortable going there at $210 million over 7 years. The Blue Jays clearly were going to be aggressive as much as he generates swing and miss as good as anybody in the game, and he does make his starts. There's always two ways to look at that, right? I mean, he's been incredibly healthy. A kid who's right down the street from me here. He's from Milton, but he had Tommy John in high school, and he hasn't had it since. Something's going to happen over those 7 years. There was risk involved there. And the other top starters are still out there. And so who knows, maybe you end up landing one. But that's where I think you could have, you talk about the ceiling part of this. I think that's where you probably could have made it happen. But they're just, and their guys are still out there, and maybe it does. But position player wise, I didn't see where it was going to fit. Kyle Schwarber's a DH, sure. That'd be probably the one way I would have been comfortable giving up the DH at bats. But that's probably about it. There really wasn't another guy out there, and it didn't seem like the Braves were in on him. And I think they did a good job with the bullpen. You brought in two good guys. One that of course, in Raisel Iglesias, and to bring Suarez in, I think was a really good fit. So it is a fair assessment. I just think a lot of it has to do with when you look at the roster of the position players, where were the upgrades really going to be able to happen? Shortstop was the only spot where you could pour some money into it, and the options were relatively thin.
I definitely agree with that. Shortstop, being the one spot, but Hassan Kim might be the best shortstop that signs this offseason if you view Bo Bichette as a second baseman long term. I mean, that's just the reality of the shortstop market this offseason. And I said this a lot on the podcast too. As far as the lineup and position player side of things go, if Acuna doesn't hit, if Olsen doesn't hit, if Riley doesn't hit, like how this offense goes is very much dependent on the core. That you mentioned and talk about, like those guys have to produce, and that's really what you're counting on, is that hopefully those guys are going to be healthy. And look, I'm not saying Olsen has produced, Acuna has produced when healthy. Riley's been in a bit of a stretch, but he's also been injured. But a big part of the offense is going to be hopefully getting these guys healthy, keeping them healthy, and then producing like we know they're capable of. And if they do that, then I think it'll be a top offense once again. Let's be real. Managing your finances can feel overwhelming between subscriptions you forgot about, bills that keep going up, and trying to figure out where all your money actually goes each month. It's easy to feel like you're losing control. And who has time to track every transaction or hunt down hidden fees? That's where Rocket Money comes in, the personal finance app that helps you take control. It finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bill so you can grow your savings. I talked about it recently on the podcast. Me and my wife trying to do a better job budgeting this month. We're canceling subscriptions. It's amazing to see how many subscriptions you have out there that you just forgot about and don't know about. Well, you won't have to worry about that when you have Rocket Money. You can set budgets and goals as well, get personalized insights, and receive real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, and low balances. It even consolidates your checking, savings, loans, and investments into a single dashboard so you can get a clearer view of your entire financial picture. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Braves your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. You'll get ad-free audio versions of the podcast, one-on-one text access with me and Lindsay, all access episodes, an exclusive newsletter, and a 15% discount to the Locked On merch store. Head to lockedonbraves.supercast.com to join the Everydayer program and unlock all access. You can also find the link in the show notes. I do agree with the fact, as we talked about, that if there is one big ceiling-raising move left, I think it's in the starting rotation. There were rumors maybe that the Braves were in on Amai. He ended up taking a much smaller deal than I thought. There were those opt-outs in there, although Alex doesn't really usually offer those, but the Braves at least were rumored to be in on that. You've heard them in on Freddie Peralta rumors here recently as well. It sounds like that AA's may be still looking for that top of the rotation starter. And I think that is where this big move could come, But what I think that does too, and what I'd like to get your thoughts on, because where I still think the weakness is on this team is in the back of the bullpen. I think they did a great job bringing in Suarez, bringing Iggy back, Dylan Lee. You have Bummer. We don't really know the status of Joe Jimenez. There's some other guys, James Karinchak maybe bouncing back, and Ian Hamilton, Joel Payamps. But the bottom of the bullpen, I'm still a little bit worried about. But if you go to get one of those big-time starters, you could push a Lopez to the bullpen. You could push a Grant Holmes to the bullpen and strengthen that area as well.
I agree. And we'll see what happens here with Grant Holmes. It's fascinating, right? This was the conversation even last year because we saw him do both. What would 2025 look like? And then unfortunately he ends up getting hurt and quite honestly did better than I thought he would be able to do as far as holding down a rotation spot. But it's a great point, right? You're another starter makes your bullpen even better and maybe answers any of those questions. A lot of that also was on Hurston Waldrop, right? If Hurston Waldrop has the kind of spring that matches kind of some of the season that he had, then that also pushes somebody out of the rotation, right? If you know that you have to have him, he has the kind of camp to say, I got to have this guy in my rotation this year based on what we saw last year, that's going to push somebody out, assuming everybody's healthy. And in the case of Grant Holmes not having any options, that means him into the bullpen. Right. And Bryce Elder's out of options too, which puts you in a spot where maybe he becomes, a bullpen piece. I know it's not an impact, hard throwing necessarily bullpen piece, but it could be an important role. And then, of course, you mentioned Ronaldo Lopez as well, if you go out and get somebody. So there's going to be, some moving parts there, I think, potentially throughout spring training, depending on how everybody looks. But Grant Holmes was good as a reliever. I know he wants to start. He deserves to start if he's healthy. But it wouldn't break my heart if he's in the bullpen because that means the rotation's in a really good place. And now you have that other really big arm. The Joe Jimenez stuff was concerning. We come to find out that he ended up having a second procedure on that knee. He was missed as much as anybody last year. I know the injuries piled up, but when you talk about guys that were hurt, that we didn't have, that we knew we weren't going to have, I just felt like night in and night out, I kept saying, man, I miss Joe Jimenez today. Like, there was just so many times where you needed that Joe Jimenez right-handed arm coming out of the pen, especially when Iggy was struggling early on, that he wasn't there. So it's always a fair assessment. It's always a fair concern. Are you deep enough in the bullpen? As it sets up right now, there's a starter or two in kind of the way that you laid it out that I think could end up being impactful in the bullpen if everybody in the rotation is healthy or if they go out and they get somebody else. Tyler Kinley threw so well last year. I was a little surprised to see that his option wasn't picked up. I think we now see why based on Suarez and getting Iggy back here. I know that we saw Pierce Johnson with a couple of rough outings toward the end, but he was good for the most part. He had a really good year. Both of those guys spin the baseball incredibly well. I'll kind of be bummed if they're not in the bullpen. I know it seems like there's maybe less a chance of both of them kind of returning. Kinley was fascinating with his slider and the way that he used it, the way he was able to change shapes and speeds on it. He used it more, just like we saw with Pierce Johnson started using that breaking pitch a lot more as a Brave than he did as a Rocky and got great results. There are still some good bullpen arms out there. I know it's gotten thin. That's been the best market in free agency. But if they don't get that starter, and I'm with you, there's still a part of me that thinks it's going to happen. There are some other bullpen arms if you feel like you need to beef it up.
Yeah, definitely. Tyler Kinley. That was the first shock of the offseason. I didn't know where we were going when you declined the options on Kinley and Pierce Johnson. But as you said, it ended up being a lot of money given to a couple of really good closers in Iggy and Suarez. But those guys could still come back, to your point. The other thing I really wanted to pick your brain about being a pitcher, the decision to move from Rick Kranitz to Jeremy Hefner. Kranitz obviously has done a fantastic job. The Braves organization in general has done a fantastic job of developing pitchers. It sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they were fine with Cranny coming back for another year, but when Jeremy Hefner became available, the Braves went out and took a shot on him. So what are your thoughts on Jeremy Hefner? What can we kind of expect from him for the Braves pitching staff going forward?
Yeah, he was great. We did have him on the radio show. I know he hasn't done a lot of media. This is a tough one for me because I love Cranny too, and he was great to us, and I just love talking baseball with him, right? He's an old school baseball guy who has done an incredible job and has left his mark on the game. I think that the trends of the game and where some of the tech is, it's not across the board that every pitcher, even though this generation is really smart with what they use, but it's not across the board that everybody wants it. I do think that there's a mix in there somewhere. And you get the impression that maybe the Braves wanted to add a little bit more to that and what they bring to the table from a tech standpoint. And that has become a younger pitching coach's game, I think, in that regard. It's not a knock on Cranny because the way Cranny was doing it is still working. And I told him afterwards when I found out he wasn't coming back, because the game's going to miss him because there are fewer and fewer Rick Kranitzes around. There's not that many anymore. It's hard to hold a coaching job down for a long time in this generation. It's one of my least favorite parts of the game. I had Rajay Davis on with me for radio for a full hour, and we were just talking about coaches, and he was talking about the impact of all these different coaches over the course of his career. And every player will tell you they can pick out a handful that made a difference. And now more than ever, I feel like these coaches are underappreciated, just in general, just kind of a blanket statement, not Rick Kranis, but just kind of a blanket statement on where we are with coaching right now. Even the fact that the Mets moved on from Jeremy Hefner, to me, feels like it was just a panic move. I mean, you see what they've done with their staff. I mean, they've cleared it out. I don't think Carlos Mendoza has anybody of his own guys right now on that staff. There's some panic in Queens, and it led to a really good pitching coach becoming a free agent. And I think that probably caught everybody by surprise as well. And where the Braves are right now, and thinking about maybe wanting to upgrade a little bit on the tech side, and guys that are a little bit more into where we are with the advanced metrics. I think that's the kind of the impression I got, that maybe what they saw here with Jeremy Hefner. But there are some deep relationships that Craney has built. The impressions that he has left his mark on this pitching staff is going to be around for a while. He is going to be missed. But I think with Jeremy Hefner, we're going to get a little bit more of that kind of tech talk, which, I think for the younger generation, for those that are following the trends of the game, they're going to eat it up. And not that he's out there, serving it up so that we can eat it up, but I think we're going to really enjoy it. I did ask him about Spencer Strider and the fastball, right? And I think I heard you talking about it as well, right? That's a big thing we're going to watch in spring training, which is, where is the fastball? Does the velocity have to come back up, or does that induce vertical break that I tried my best to explain in a broadcast without sounding too nerdy? Is that going to come back? And I asked Jeremy Hefner about it. I said, is that a possibility? And I missed this last year, and I'm bummed about it, but I didn't realize that Spencer Strider's arm angle came down. Compared to where he was peak years. If you go look at Baseball Savant and look at him at a couple of years ago when he was dominating, he's down about 6 or 7 degrees last year. And he felt, and Jeremy Hefner was the one that pointed it out. We talked about it a ton with Sale, right at the very beginning of the season. Chris Sale's arm angle was down. I missed it on Spencer Strider. That's why there's so much information, man. It's just so hard to keep up with everything. But he pointed it out. I went and looked at it, and he feels like perhaps they can get him back up a little bit, and that'll help. If the velocity doesn't come back, the break, the induced vertical break, the ride on his fastball, to me, I feel like is more important than the velo. That's how you get your swing and miss with a good heater. That's the kind of stuff you're going to get with Jeremy Hefner.
Yeah, because it's still 95. Like, I know the game has changed, but it's still 95, 96. That's what I keep saying. It's still good velocity, but when he was missing middle with it, and you don't have that, perceived rise on the baseball, it becomes a meatball. And so
it's crazy, right? The idea, I'm with you, man. Like, you're like, oh, of course you could pitch at 95. And for an older guy like me, or at least coming from a different generation, my wife hates when I say I'm older, but I got enough hair for it. But just the idea that, we would say, of course, I can pitch at 95, 96. But to your point, less margin for error, less mistakes. And every pitcher goes through it, man. I always use a couple of guys as examples. And I'm not saying Strider's there yet, but Tin Lincecum, CC Sabathia. They started to lose their fastball, literally started to lose their fastball. And Lincecum was obviously a lot younger than Sabathia, but there was adjustments that had to be made. And in the case of CC Sabathia, it turned into that cutter. It turned to some two-seamers, right? And I know Strider will talk about, or maybe he won't talk about it, but we know that he is more of a guy that doesn't pronate, so he doesn't run the ball as well. So it's not going to be a two-seamer. It's got to be a kick change instead of a standard change. I've always wondered about a split for him. So we may see something new in spring training, or we're going to see some of that induced vertical break back. But if the velo doesn't come back up, to your point, the mistakes, unfortunately, have to be fewer and fewer.
Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the game tips off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Opening the FanDuel app during Happy Hour always brings something new with a boost, bonuses, and surprises. It's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. It adds a little bit extra energy to that Friday night basketball without overthinking it. But maybe you're like me, you're looking for the baseball season coming up. We talked about the Braves' odds throughout the offseason of winning the World Series. They started at plus 2,000 on FanDuel. They're now up to plus 1,300. They now have the 5th highest odds, tied for the 4th best odds to win the World Series, behind the Dodgers, Yankees, and Phillies, and tied with the Mariners and Blue Jays, who have made a lot of moves this offseason. See all that over at FanDuel. Also, make sure you visit fanduel.com/play safe for tools and resources to help you stay in control of the way you play. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Yeah. While we're talking about coaches here, I know last time me and you spoke on the podcast, we talked about good friend of yours, Tim Hires. And, you talked about you talked about how tough it is for coaches these days. And, you look at a guy like Seitzer, who was really good here for a long time and produced one of the best offenses we've ever seen in Atlanta. But it just felt like, okay, it's time for new directions, time for a new voice. I don't think he forgot how to coach. I mean, you look what he did with Seattle last year. I mean, but Tim Hires coming in, trying to kind of reestablish this offense and get them going in the right direction. And it was still a pretty tough year. Now, a lot of injuries on the position player side of things too. You don't have Ronald as much as you would like. Profar's gone for 80 games. How would you kind of evaluate the first year for Tim? And I don't know if you've spoken to him a lot, since the season ended to kind of get his reflection on the season, but how would you kind of evaluate that first season for Tim Hires?
So I would tell you that I think from my position, it's nearly impossible to have a fair evaluation of any coach, right? We could look at results, and when a guy does really well, sometimes we'll make an assumption, man, a coach is doing a great job. But I've brought this point up before, and that is you never know which guys are going along with which coaches, right? These coaching staffs run so deep now, and you never know, especially hitting gets so technical, and it happens a lot on the pitching side as well. But there's a lot that happens outside the organization, and that has become more accepted than ever. And I don't know with our guys who does what. I will use the example when I was in Texas, when Corey Seager was there. Corey Seager uses an outside hitting coach. I don't know how much he consults the regular hitting coaches at all, and he may not at all, right? He's on an iPad every day talking with his coach remotely about his swing, right? So if all of a sudden he goes out and has a couple of bad months and everyone wants to fire the hitting coach, hey, you better double check and make sure, not that we're going to be able to. Is he even using the hitting coach? That's the part that we don't know. So that's why it's unfair. But I had a lot of conversations with him over the course of the season, and I love talking hitting. He was always pretty honest with us with what he could, share and comfortable sharing that we could talk about on a broadcast, what a guy might be working on. I will say the other part of that too is that with him being the new guy and coming in, he wasn't going to come in like, I'm going to change everything. Of course not. There's a lot of really good players. And then when they did see something early, did that player trust him enough to then make the adjustment? Right. I think that's another big one as well. And we'll never know those kinds of things. Right. We saw Michael end up having a really strong second half, although he slipped into some bad habits toward the stretch, down the stretch. We don't know when they actually came to him about moving his hands and opening up a little bit. But I doubt it was right there in the middle of the season. Right. I think Michael had to hit rock bottom last year before he was actually willing to kind of open up and make some adjustments. I think that's always one of those things that players sometimes just have to go through, especially when you've had a lot of success in the past. So I don't just say this because I know him and he's a friend and he's a former teammate. I will tell you this about any coach. Like, I've never been around Jeremy Hefner. I've talked to him now one time, and I'll watch him and I'll get to know him a little bit, but I don't feel comfortable evaluating a coach unless there's something so blatantly obvious that isn't good. And the team's going to be on that before we are. And then the coach would be removed. But it's a tough time to be a coach because these guys have so many voices that they're taking in. And you never know who's doing it, right? But we did see the walk rate get better. We saw the patience get a little bit better. He did not have a year where he had everybody. Like, this will be hopefully a good year where we'll get a good feel, right? Where hopefully it's a full year of Ronald this year and a full year of Austin. We know every year is a full year of Matt Olson, but now Drake Baldwin coming off of what he did, right? And keeping an eye on how the league's going to adjust to him and the back and forth there. The only way I think you get a real answer on evaluating coaches, quite honestly, are the players that he's working with and really listening to how it's going. Like, if I'm Alex Anthopoulos or I'm running a team, I like to have some individual conversations and get some real honest one-on-one, just between us, feedback, and tell me how this coach is working out. Tell me how that coach is working out. I think that's really the only way that you get a fair evaluation.
Yeah, and that's certainly a fair take on it. I think where I was kind of going with it, and you touched on it too, is it did feel like there was a different approach for a lot of hitters last year, that they were a lot more patient. We saw a lot more walks, from Marcell Ozuna and even Ozzy to an extent walked, more than he normally does. It was really only Michael that kind of wasn't on board with that. But you even just take a look at the type of hitter that they've hitters that they brought in, and Profar being more of a contact-oriented type of player, Hassan Kim being more of a contact-oriented player. And, Mike Yastrzemski doesn't necessarily fit that, but he does walk a good bit, a career walk rate over 10%. He'll still strike out a fair amount, but it feels like, at least from making the coaching change and then seeing them be a little bit more patient last year, and then also combining that with some of the players they brought in, it does feel like, from an outside perspective, that there has been this approach change offensively for the Atlanta Braves. Yeah,
maybe. I mean, like I said, he's not going to tell all 13 active guys how to approach, and they're going to do it automatically that way. Those conversations are happening. And nowadays, probably more than ever, how are you bringing data to these players, and how are you interpreting it for them? Because you are the go-between, right? And making things available to those players. And then it's kind of up to them on how they use it. I will tell you an example I use a lot. And we might have talked about this last year. I can't remember, but a couple of years ago, I was having a conversation with a hitting coach in another organization when I was with the Rangers, and he was very good about kind of sharing some game plan and what they're looking at and what they're expecting. And it always came down to, we'll lay it out there. Here's what you're getting tonight, and your swing in particular, we're going to tell you how this is going to play. And then now it's up to you. Do you want to make the adjustment, or do you want to still go in and kind of just be yourself? The example was high vert fastball guy. A guy who's got that fastball that appears to have some rise to it. Your swing has a little bit of an uppercut to it. You're not going to get to that fastball with your swing. If you take your swing to that fastball, it's an 0 for 4 night, right? But if you can get your hands above the baseball, if you can make this slight adjustment when you see that fastball come out of the hands, you're going to have much more of a chance. Right now, it's in the player's hands. He makes that decision. Can I get there the way I swing, or am I comfortable kind of making this adjustment, which maybe he feels like it takes a little power away? Maybe it feels like it takes, his ability to drive the baseball, whatever it is, and wants to stick with his swing. Because the one thing about being a big league baseball player, even though there's a lot of nice guys, there's some ego to everybody. Everybody thinks they can do amazing things on the field because you've reached the highest level. And sometimes that can turn into, I don't need to make that adjustment, right? And that's where you start to run into trouble. I will say, in general, most of the guys that end up having improvement seasons, there's a swing percentage drop. It's rare that you see a guy swinging more and ends up having a better year. I use the example, go way back when Bryce Harper was with the Nationals and he had his MVP year, and he had talked about basically trying to put his ego aside and saying, yeah, I feel like I could hit inside, outside, up and down, but really starting to understand where his strengths were and letting some of those pitches go. Let's just say middle away was a weakness for him. Letting that go early in counts, unless he had to swing at it with 2 strikes, he'd go after it because he knew he was better middle in. Like being more patient, waiting for my pitch earlier in counts. And then if I get down in the count, then so be it. Then I got to change it and go to my 2-strike approach. That's an example of a guy and end up having a great year by swinging less. You go then look at the next season. They started walking him like crazy. I don't know if you remember that. There was a series of Joe Madden walked him like 13 times, right? Yeah. So you remember that? And then all of a sudden he started swinging more. Like then he started getting annoyed by it. And then he opened it back up again. And he wasn't quite the same. He's been a great player. We're going to have a lot of fun with the not-elite stuff probably all year long from Dave Dombrowski. But that's just kind of an example of what we're talking about when it comes to the coaches, when it comes to the approach, when it comes to the adjustments you're willing to make. It's always going to be on the player. I highly doubt that anybody's getting bad information. It's always going to be about how much you believe in it, how much you're willing to apply it, how much you're willing to put maybe some things aside that you think are your strengths because they're telling you your strength is not going to be a strength tonight if you don't adjust.
Yeah, no, I think that's some great insight there. So I appreciate you sharing that. That will do it for this episode of Locked On Braves. Again, thanks for making this your first listen of the day. Thanks so much for CJ for joining us on today's episode. Can't wait to hear he and Brandon delivering Braves baseball to us all summer long. Again, if you haven't already, go check out CJ and all his work that he is doing, not just for the Braves, but his podcast or the show that he has for MLB Network. He also has a podcast, the Drive-In podcast as well, which is great. CJ does a lot of fantastic stuff. So glad we're able to get him on the podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in again to Locked On Braves. Follow me on social media at Shortstop Ball. Follow the podcast at LockedOn_Braves on X, Locked On Braves on Instagram, TikTok, all of that stuff. If you haven't already, you're new on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment down below. Make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast, and we will talk to you next time.